Woman helps a wolf dog, but days later the dog returns with his herd, and a tragedy occurs that leaves everyone shocked and emotional. Rachel was in the middle of the forest, very far from any city, working on an expedition with her colleagues. They were there to study rare animals, but what she found that day changed everything. While walking down a narrow path, she heard a weak sound coming from under some dry leaves. It was almost like a soft cry. When she looked closer, her heart almost stopped. It was a wolf cub, small and trembling with pain, trapped in a trap. He knelt down immediately, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger. How could someone do that to such an indefense animal? The other scientists tried to warn him. Rachel, it is dangerous to interfere with wild wolves. His mother could be close, but she did not think twice. She took out her tools, breathed deeply, and began to release the cub with all the care in the world. The little dog could barely move. His legs were injured, and he looked at Rachel with those bright eyes, full of fear and pain. But there was something else, something Rachel could not explain. It was as if he was asking for help, trusting her in a special way. When he finally managed to remove the trap, he held it in his arms. The dog did not try to escape, he just stayed still, as if he knew he was safe. Rachel knew that was just the beginning, necessitated to help him survive. What he didn't know was that, when he saved that puppy, he was about to live the greatest adventure of his life. Rachel took the puppy to the camp. He was so weak that he could barely get up. She prepared an improvised bed with a blanket and began to take care of him. She cleaned the wounds, gave him water little by little, and, with great patience, offered him food. At first, the puppy seemed suspicious, but it didn't take long before he started relaxing near her. With every passing hour, something different would happen. The little wolf, whom he decided to call because of the grayish color of his fur, began to follow her throughout the camp. Wherever Rachel went, he tried to accompany her with his legs even so. That warmed her heart in a way she had never felt before. It wasn't just an animal helping her. They were creating a special bond. Rachel began to notice things that intrigued her. Asno acted like a normal puppy. She seemed to understand every gesture, every soft word she said to calm him down. When she was crouched down to pick up something, he would tilt his head as if he were trying to decipher what he was doing. It was as if he wanted to learn everything about her. In a few days, Rachel could not imagine her routine without being close. She was much more than a wolf that she had rescued. She was her companion on that journey, and she felt that something much bigger was about to happen. What Rachel still did not know was that, while she was taking care of him, Az was also taking care of her in a way that no one could have predicted. Rachel woke up early that morning, as usual, to review her notes on the animals in the forest. While she was preparing the coffee, she noticed that she was restless. With his ears raised and eyes fixed towards the forest, as if he were waiting for something. "What's wrong, little one? Do you feel something?" he said, trying to calm him down, but he didn't seem willing to relax. Later, while he was walking through the camp, Rachel heard a distant sound. It was a sound that immediately recognized howling. They weren't simple random howls, but a clear communication, something that wolves use to call the members of the herd. His heart accelerated. They came for him, he thought. He looked at Ash, who was already standing, completely attentive. Rachel felt divided. Part of her knew that this was the moment she needed to go back with her family. But the other part was not ready to let him go. They had created such a strong bond, and the idea of saying goodbye so soon oppressed her chest. She breathed deeply, trying to find the courage for what was to come. Shortly after, Rachel saw them. Only shadows between the trees. Then the shapes began to appear, big and majestic. It was the hermit. They were cautious, keeping a certain distance, but clearly focused on us. The leader of the hermit immediately caught their attention. He was huge, with scars on his face that told stories of old battles. He seemed to be evaluating the situation with the fixed eyes on Rachel and the puppy. He gave you a wavering step towards the hermit, but he stopped and looked at Rachel as if asking for permission. That moment broke his heart. He bowed, caressed his head and said, "Look, they are your family." But before she could leave, something surprising happened. The herd leader, instead of simply taking the puppy and leaving, began to walk towards Rachel. She was still motionless, with her heart racing. It was huge, but her movements were not aggressive. When she was close enough, she stopped and looked at her. It was a strange moment, almost as if she were thanking him for taking care of Ash. Then, without hurry, he turned around and called the puppy with a small howl. He looked at Rachel once again, as if he wanted to make sure he was okay. Then he began to walk towards the herd. Rachel stayed there, trying to hold back the tears. It wasn't just about losing Ash. It was about realizing the greatness of what had just happened. He had helped a wild animal, and now he was witnessing a moment that few people in the world had seen. A herd recognizing and accepting one of their own again. When the wolves disappeared in the forest, Rachel had a strange feeling. It was a mixture of sadness and realization. But something inside her told her that this story was far from over. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and like it if you like to listen to emotional and inspiring stories that involve animals. After the herd took Ash, Rachel tried to focus on her work. But it wasn't easy. Every time she heard the crunch of a branch or a distant sound, he turned his head, as if he were waiting to see the wolves again. That connection he had created with the dog seemed to continue alive, even being far away. He continued with his routine, but something in the environment seemed different, heavier. At the end of the afternoon, while he was checking the camp equipment, Rachel heard a sound that had nothing natural. A shot. Strong, dry, breaking the silence of the forest. He stopped immediately, with his heart beating with force. The shots in that area could only mean one thing: hunters. And I knew that the wolves were the target. Rachel was paralyzed for a moment, but quickly recovered. She took her binoculars and quickly climbed up to a hill near the camp to try to understand what was happening. It was then that she saw something that took her breath away. A group of men walking through the forest, carrying heavy weapons and backpacks. They weren't there by chance, they were hunting something big. And she knew exactly what it was. She felt a knot in her chest. The wolves, the pack of them, were in danger. These hunters were not random people looking for a trophy. Because of the equipment and the way they moved, Rachel realized they were professionals, probably part of an illegal scheme. She knew that this type of people had no mercy or limits. Rachel ran back to the camp. She needed to think fast. She had to do something. But what? It would be ideal to tell the authorities. But the radio signal in that region was weak, and I knew I would not receive help soon. Looking around, I realized that I could not simply ignore what was happening. I helped them, now they need me, I thought. Although I did not know exactly how, I was determined to protect the herd. While I was trying to come up with a plan, another sound caught their attention. It was a noise, but not a common one. It was urgent, almost like a call for help. Rachel ran towards the sound, knowing that he was at risk, but her desire to protect the wolves was stronger. When she arrived at the place, she found fresh footprints mixed with boot marks. The hunters were getting closer and closer to the herd. The adrenaline got stronger. I have to act before it's too late, she murmured to herself. She had no weapons or a specific plan, but she had her knowledge of the forest and the habits of the wolves. Especially, he had the courage of someone who already knew what it was like to create a bond with these animals. Rachel knew that she was about to face something much bigger than she imagined. But at that moment, she had no choice. She would do everything she could to protect the Diaz herd. Without much time to lose, Rachel got what she had: a flashlight, a knife, and her knowledge of the forest. Following the footprints she had found, she began to trace a path parallel to that of the hunters, trying to get to the herd before them. His heart beat faster, but his mind was focused. Each step was a mixture of fear and determination. While he was running, Rachel noticed something. It was Ash, the little puppy that he had taken care of. He was standing in a clear, looking at her directly. "Ash, what are you doing here?" "You should be with them," he whispered, without being able to believe what he saw. But the puppy did not move. He seemed to be waiting for her, as if she knew they needed to be together. Rachel knelt down, extended her hand, and saw that she was more restless than before. She began to run, stopping from time to time to look back and make sure she was following him. Rachel understood the message. He was guiding her towards the handle. "You are smarter than I imagined," he said, trying to relieve the tension. But the truth was that he knew he was entering a dangerous territory. They arrived at a point where the herd was gathered. The wolves were in a circle, clearly agitated, as if they knew something bad was approaching. The leader of the herd, the great wolf with scars that Rachel had seen before, got up and looked at her. For a moment it seemed that he was going to attack her, but then something unexpected happened. He took a step aside, as if accepting his presence there. Rachel knew that the wolves understood the danger, but they could not face the weapons alone. He had to think fast. Using his knowledge of the area, he recalled a series of narrow and difficult trails to cross, full of rocks and dense bushes that could hinder the hunter's movement. If he managed to guide the wolves around there, they might have had a chance to escape. "Listen, I know you don't understand what I'm saying, but I'm going to help you," he said, looking at the leader as if he could understand her. Taking a stone, he began to gently hit another, making a sound that caught the attention of the wolves. Little by little, they began to follow Rachel, led by the great wolf. Ashno was moving away from her side, as if she were protecting her. Meanwhile, the hunters were getting closer and closer. Rachel could hear the crunching of the branches under her feet and the voices off, giving orders. She knew that, if they didn't move fast, they would be found. Guiding the wolves along the most difficult path she knew, Rachel used all the tricks she knew. She spread branches to cover footprints, she moved stones to create barriers, and even threw pieces of her food to distract possible dog-hunting dogs. The tension was almost unbearable. Every time she heard a closer sound, her heart would speed up, but the wolves were incredibly quiet, as if they knew they had to trust her at that moment. When they finally reached a higher and safer point, Rachel looked back and saw that the hunters were losing track. For a moment, she felt relieved, but the feeling lasted little. They were safe for now, but she knew that the chase had not yet ended. Rachel looked at the leader of the herd, who seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. "This has not yet ended, but we are together in this," she whispered, while she rubbed against her leg as if she were okay. Rachel knew that the relief she felt when she misled the hunters would not last long. They were determined, and the distant sound of footsteps and voices made it clear that the persecution continued. As she tried to think of her next move, she realized that the wolves were also restless. The leader of the herd walked from one side to the other, sniffing the air, and the other wolves followed her movements as soldiers waiting for orders. Suddenly, a closer sound broke the silence. The metallic click of a gun being loaded. Rachel froze. The hunters were closer than they had imagined. "We don't have time," she murmured to herself. She needed to act quickly. But what could she do? She had no weapons, no equipment. She only had the wolves and her knowledge of the forest. The leader of the herd looked at Rachel as if she were expecting something from her. It was a firm look, almost as if she were saying, "Let's fight." Rachel breathed deeply and tried to think of something. She couldn't let them be captured or killed. They needed an opportunity. Then she had an idea. "I'm going to distract them," she said in a low voice, looking at the leader like this. She knew he was risky, but she didn't see another option. She took a piece of her broken flashlight and reflected the light towards a nearby tree. The reflection shone in the darkness, attracting the attention of the hunters. He knew that they would think it was a movement of the wolves and they would continue in that direction. It worked for a few seconds, but then the hunters realized the trick and redid the search. One of them shouted, "Are they close? Disperse." Rachel felt the panic grow. It was now or never. The wolves, perceiving the danger, formed a circle around them, as if they knew they needed protection. When the first hunters emerged from the trees, the leader of the herd advanced with a fierce grunt. The sound was so intense that it even made men doubt for a moment. But soon they reacted, pointing their weapons. Rachel screamed, "No, leave them alone." But the hunters had no intention of retreating. Ash, the little puppy, was next to Rachel, trembling but not moving. He seemed to be waiting for the leader's signal. And then something unexpected happened. The wolves began to move together, like a perfect unit. While the leader distracted the hunters with his impressive presence, the other wolves attacked the flanks, fast as shadows. Rachel knew she had to do something else. She remembered a narrow path full of loose stones and dense bushes that was close. If I manage to take them there, the hunters will have difficulties to follow them, she thought. She yelled at the wolves while pointing towards the path, waiting for them to understand the gesture. For his surprise, the leader looked at her and began to guide the herd towards the right place. But the fight didn't end there. One of the hunters fired to scare the wolves, and the bullet hit a nearby tree, causing wooden sticks to fly through the air. Rachel felt the adrenaline run through her body. "I won't let them catch you," Ash whispered, holding the little wolf close to her as she ran to follow the herd. The confrontation was far from being decided, but one thing was clear at that moment. Rachel was not fighting alone. She had the wolves by her side, and they were willing to do anything to protect each other, and in some way to protect her as well. In the midst of the chaos, Rachel realized something that left her completely amazed. The wolves not only reacted to danger instinctively, there was a coordination between them that seemed almost planned. The leader of the herd, with his imposing posture, but what really left her speechless was the little puppy, whom she thought was defenseless, was acting in a way that made no sense. She was sitting next to him, facing the hunters without showing fear. Rachel tried to hold him, worried about her safety, but she slowly moved away, as if she knew exactly what she had to do. She called him, but he only looked back with a look that seemed to say, as he began to howl, it was not a common sound. It was long, firm, and seemed to have a purpose. The other wolves stopped immediately and, one by one, they began to join the chorus. Rachel felt that the hairs on her neck were scratching. That howl was different from anything she had heard before. It was as if the whole forest was responding to the call. The winds began to blow harder, the trees moved, and even the hunters, that before seemed so confident, began to doubt. Rachel, kneeling on the ground, watched everything without being able to fully understand what was happening. "This is not normal," she murmured to herself, with her heart racing. She felt something deep was happening, as if she were connected to that moment in an inexplicable way. She continued to howl, and her eyes shone with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. Now visibly frightened, began to retreat. One of them murmured, "Is this some kind of curse? These wolves are bewitched." The leader of the herd took a step forward, showing his teeth, and the other wolves followed him. It was as if all the force of nature was on his side. Rachel felt such a strong wave of emotion that she could barely contain her tears. She did not know how to explain it, but it was clear that ACI and the wolves had a special connection with the forest. Something that went much beyond any scientific study. It was as if she was witnessing an ancestral moment, a force of nature that few have the opportunity to see. While the roar of AZ resounded, Rachel felt something change within her. It was as if she was also connected to that force. And at that moment I knew it, she was not just a spectator. In some way she was part of all that. AZ was not only calling the wolves, he was calling the whole forest. And Rachel was an essential component of that story. The hunters, confused and terrified, began to retreat. The leader of the herd issued a last grunt, firm and threatening, before turning around and guiding the other wolves to a safer place. Ash, before following them, returned with Rachel and rubbed his head against her leg, as if saying thanks. And then, with a last deep look, he left. Rachel stayed there, kneeling in the forest, feeling how the wind was slowing down and the silence was slowly returning. He still didn't fully understand what had happened, but there was something he was sure of. His connection with ACI Laminata was stronger than he had ever imagined. And, in some way, he knew that this story was far from over. Rachel barely had time to breathe before the hunters reorganized. Despite the fear they had shown before the howl of the herd, now they seemed even more determined. Perhaps it was the shame of doubting or simply the greed that drove them. One of them shouted, "Let's end this, they are just wolves." That phrase made Rachel's blood boil. They didn't understand anything. Those animals were not just wolves. There was something much bigger there, something that she still did not fully understand. She realized that the hunters were approaching again, armed and ready to attack. The leader of the herd did not retreat. On the contrary, with the other wolves following him. Rachel knew that the wolves would fight until the end to protect themselves. But this time the courage would not be enough. They were facing weapons, and weapons have no compassion. Then Rachel remembered her emergency GPS. It was a device designed for extreme situations, capable of sending a signal directly to the nearest authorities. She had never used it before and knew it would take time for someone to arrive, but it was her only chance. With trembling hands, he took out the device from his backpack and activated the red button. A small sound confirmed that the signal had been sent. Now it was a matter of time. Meanwhile, the hunters advanced and the tension increased. Rachel knew that she could not simply wait. She needed to earn time. She started screaming, trying to divert her attention. They are committing a crime. The whole forest knows that you do not belong here. Her voice resounded in the place, and could see the doubt in some of the men. But not all were intimidated. It was then that something changed. The little wolf, who before seemed so defenseless, ran to the front of the herd and issued a new roar, shorter, but even more powerful. It looked like a command. The other wolves reacted immediately, scattered around the area and surrounding the hunters in a way that left them confused. They didn't know where to point. Where is it? Looking around, lost. Rachel realized that the wolves were using the forest in her favor. They moved silently among the trees, appearing at one point and disappearing at another, disorienting the hunters. It was as if they had learned to turn the terrain into a natural trap. Even the leader, who normally commanded with presence and strength, was now using intelligence and strategy. Rachel was impressed. They weren't just running away, were fighting in a way that seemed planned. But that was not the only thing that surprised Rachel. In a moment of pure tension, you returned with her. It seemed to wait for something, as if it asked her to trust him. Rachel, although she did not fully understand, decided to follow her instinct. "Okay, little one, whatever you do, I trust you," she whispered. You ran back to the front, stopping in a strategic position where her little figure was visible to the hunters. The men saw him and, instead of firing, they began to approach. "Catch that dog, it's worth a fortune," one of them shouted. Perroas was not alone. Just when they approached enough, the other wolves suddenly appeared, surrounding the hunters. It was a perfect ambush. The men were paralyzed without knowing how to react. At that exact moment, the sound of helicopters cut the air. It was the rescue team that Rachel had called. Now cornered, they dropped their weapons and began to raise their hands. They had nowhere to run. Rachel felt immense relief. They had done it. As the authorities descended, the wolves quietly retreated, as if they knew that the danger had passed. She turned to Rachel, rubbing her head against her leg. She smiled, excited, and whispered, "You are a little genius. Did you know?" But something within Rachel told him that this was more than a simple victory. The way the wolves had worked together, the connection that he felt with the role that everyone had played, there was something deeper in that relationship, something that he still needed to understand. With the arrested hunters and the danger eliminated, Rachel finally felt the relief to fill it. But at the same time, a new feeling emerged. The farewell was near. She knew that the wolves couldn't stay close to the time the authorities were in the area. They needed to return to the place they belonged, the forest, and she had to follow her path. While the authorities were organizing the retreat of the hunters, the wolves began to move. The leader of the herd looked at Rachel for the last time, with eyes full of something that seemed more than just instinct. It was as if she understood the role she had played in saving her family. She took a step towards her and, for everyone's surprise, she rubbed her snout against Rachel's arm. She was still feeling the force of that gesture. It wasn't just gratitude, it was respect. However, she didn't seem ready to leave. She stood still next to Rachel, looking at her as if she didn't want to leave her. "You have to go, little one," she said, kneeling down to caress him. "They need you." With tears in her eyes, she gave the dog a last hug. Rachel was watching as the wolves disappeared among the trees. Even when she couldn't see them anymore, she continued to feel their presence. as if that bond could never break. It was a sweet moment. She had helped save the herd, but she was also leaving behind a connection that had transformed her life. When she returned home, Rachel could not stop thinking about the experience she had lived. The connection with Ash, the strategic behavior of the wolves, and even the moment when he felt that the whole forest responded to his eaves. All that changed his way of seeing the world. He knew that he could not simply return to the normal routine. Something within her had awakened. Rachel decided that she had to do more to protect the wolves and the nature she loved so much. She began to plan a conservation project focused on protecting the habitats of the wolves and educating people on the importance of these animals. He managed to attract partners and funding to create a reserve where the wolves could live free and protected. But even while he was working on the project, Rachel did not forget about Ash. There were nights when she closed her eyes and could almost hear the little wolf howling in the forest. Sometimes she wondered if he still thought of her as she thought of him. Months later, while visiting an area near the reserve, Rachel heard a familiar sound. It was a long and clear howl that seemed to call her. When she looked towards the edge of the forest, she saw a gray figure. It was Ash. She was bigger, stronger, but her eyes still shone in the same way. For a moment, she stood there, as if she were saying, "I never forgot you." Then she turned around and disappeared among the trees, as if she wanted to remind Rachel that, even if they lived in different worlds, they would always be connected. That was the confirmation that Rachel needed. What they lived together was not just a coincidence or an accident. It was something bigger, something that showed that, when humans and nature meet in a genuine way, both can grow and transform. She knew she would never be the same again, and that was exactly what she wanted. Thanks for watching this video until the end. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your opinion on this story.